Over the course of a year travelling in Africa, we camped in some remarkably beautiful places, and I have many fond memories of the different campsites that we stayed in. I've always loved camping. My favourite actually was not so much sleeping in the tent. What I really loved was having a big fire and sleeping out on my mat beside the fire, looking up at the stars, and it was fantastic. Probably for most of 6 months I slept every night out, unless it was a wet night and I slept in my tent. But we stayed in some very memorable places as well. I remember 2 campsites in particular when we were driving down across Italy. The first was we were approaching Sicily. We were down in the southern part of Italy. It was late in the afternoon, and one of our unwritten rules that we'd agreed on was that we would never drive after dark, partly because just the danger of the roads and partly because we wanted to find a good safe place to camp while it was still daylight. So anyway, on this particular afternoon we were trying to get as close as we could to the ferry before nightfall. And so we were driving late. It was becoming dark. It was a very hilly area, and we were leaving a town and trying to find a flat place where we could camp for free, and struggling. We kept following roads up dead ends, and finally we found a road that seemed to be heading out of town up a winding path up a hill. We kept going and we got to the top of a road. It was very dark up there. There were no lights. We passed through what seemed to be some kind of gate, and then we came into a clearing at the top, and it was fairly flat, and we parked and we got out. It was totally dark up there, but we could see down in the valley a few twinkling lights, and we thought this was a distant village. So we decided this was a good place to spend the night. We camped out, we didn't put tents up, we just slept out beside the Land Rovers on this flat piece of ground. And when we woke up in the morning, the first person to wake up quickly woke the others, and we discovered that we were actually sleeping inside a cemetery, and all these twinkling lights were candles that people had put up beside the different graves and shrines. So that was one of our memorable nights. Funnily enough, 2 or 3 nights later, we had driven through Sicily, and once again we drove late because we wanted to get to the ferry. We knew that the ferry was leaving very early in the morning from Palmero to Tunis, and so we set up camp. We found a place outside of the town. It was again difficult to find a camping site, but we found an olive grove, and we set up our kind of base in this olive grove at the bottom of a hill, which was a mistake. We could see over the Mediterranean that there were storm clouds building up, thunder and lightning was building up, and we decided that because it was already evening and we were getting up so early in the morning, we wouldn't set up our tents. Again, that was a mistake. The rain was in the distance and it was quite dramatic. We could see lightning, and we were taking photos of the lightning. We set up an awning. We had an awning that was fixed to the Land Rover. It was a kind of an L-shaped awning that went around the side and around the back. 3 of the people had set up their sleeping areas underneath the awning and were bedding down for the night. And I remember 2 people had the tripods and they were taking photos. And myself and one of the other guys, we thought to ourselves, actually, this thunder and lightning is getting closer. The rain's going to hit us. So we decided we're going to put up a tent. Doesn't matter what anyone else is doing. So we grabbed our tent and we're quickly putting it up. And it became fairly obvious that this storm was coming close. So we started shouting to the others, come on guys, put your tents up. 3 people are under their awning. They slowly began to get up and began to put their things away. And then the rain was suddenly hitting us. Again, the 2 guys are still there with their tripods and their cameras, trying to get the perfect photo of forked lightning. But my abiding memory is of one of the guys who was leaning over a stove, and I shouted to him, come on, come and help, put a tent up. And he said, I'm making a cup of tea, which is a great British response. Fortunately, the 2 of us managed to get our tent up just in time. We dived inside our tent, and then the rain hit. Absolutely torrential rain, driving rain, thunder and lightning all around. The other poor guys weren't able to get their tents up in time. They managed to get their sleeping bags and the cameras and all of the stoves and stuff into the back of the Land Rover, and they spent a miserable, cold, wet night in the back of the Land Rover, sitting up while the 2 of us were in our tent, which was a memorable night, to say the least. We crossed over into Tunisia the next day, and then the next really memorable campsite that I can remember was in the mountains outside of Algiers, in Algeria. We were driving down into Algiers in the day because we needed to use the embassies. We were trying to get visas for our onward travel across the Sahara. And we struggled to find a campsite, but we eventually found a beautiful site. It was about an hour's drive outside of the city, again, a winding road up into the Atlas Mountains. And we found basically a gate that opened up into an old quarry. We managed to get through the gate and we found this quiet, secluded area away from the road with spectacular views over a whole range of mountains, just beautiful sight. And we stayed there for several nights, had a beautiful mountain campsite an hour outside the city. We were preparing to set out across the Sahara. And it was there that one of my abiding memories of our whole trip happened. Now, I've always been the personality, I suppose, that I'm quick to volunteer for things. I guess one of my mottos has been deep end ministry. The idea that if you throw people in the deep end, they learn to sink or swim. And it's a great way to grow. It's not always the best way, I realise now, but it's the way I guess I've grown. I've tended to volunteer for things. I tend to be the person like Peter that's quick to jump out of the boat. I think if you're one of the first out of the boat, you experience it first. You grow through it. I realise that probably some of this is my own scepticism. I don't tend to trust what other people say always. It's kind of like I need to prove it for myself. So I'd rather do it myself first and discover if it works or not than wait for someone else to do it. So if I go for a walk up the mountain, I tend to want to find a new route. I don't want to take the same route as everybody else. Now, sometimes this kind of deep end ministry can get you into trouble. And I discovered that for myself in the mountains of Algiers. And we were setting out across the Sahara. We knew that we needed to fill up with fuel. We filled all our diesel jerry cans. We knew that we needed a lot of water to cross the Sahara, often spending hundreds of kilometres between oases. And you need to take a lot of water because it's hot. So we knew we needed at least 25 litres of water per person just to be safe. So we had 15 jerry cans and we wanted to fill them all up. And we found a well which was a few miles away from where we were camping. So 3 of us drove across in the Land Rover and we were filling up these jerry cans with water from this well. This well was a beautifully made well. It was a round circular well with a wall probably 3.5 or 4 foot high around the well. The well was about 8 foot in diameter and it was incredibly deep. You could look down and the water looked like it was probably 20 metres below. There was a rope with a bucket on the end. The bucket was kept up on the wall and you threw the bucket down and you slowly pulled it up and then you poured the water into the jerry cans. So it was quite a slow, laborious process. The 3 of us had got our jerry cans out and we perhaps foolishly balanced them on the wall around the well and we were filling them up. And several jerry cans into this, because it was a lengthy process, we'd been filling the cans for probably 20 minutes or so, when one of the cans got banged by somebody's elbow and it fell down inside the well. We could see it down there, far beneath us, bobbing on the surface of the water. We looked down at this jerry can. This, for us, was an essential item. We couldn't afford to lose it. Being the treasurer of the team and the facts and figures guy, I knew how many litres we needed, and in my mind we could not afford to lose this jerry can. We carried on filling up the other jerry cans until they were all filled, and then as we looked down at this other jerry can, you could see that it was slowly filling up with water and it was beginning to bob in the water. And I thought, we can't lose this jerry can, we can't leave it there. So I decided I would go down the well to get the jerry can. Now, this is not one of my better ideas, it has to be said. So I said to the other 2 guys, look, I'll go down. And they agreed. I was the smallest out of the 3 of us. They were 2 strong guys. They would lower me down the well. So we went to the back of the Land Rover. We got out a climbing rope, which was a long 50-metre rope. We doubled it in half. The 2 guys tied each end around their waists. They walked about 25 metres away from me and I stood on top of the wall of the well and I put this rope under my arms and around my back and I sort of stood in the V of this rope and braced myself and slowly leant backwards over the void. Remember that moment of standing over nothing and my feet against the side of the wall, thinking, whoa! And then the two guys started walking in towards me along the lines of this V, and I slowly started walking backwards down the wall. Now at this point, this is a nice big circular well, round sides, beautifully made. It was kind of had brown sort of terracotta roof tiles or wall tiles around the side of the well, but it was incredibly smooth. I remember thinking that as I was going down, wow, this is smooth. Not realising really the significance of that. They lowered me right down into the well. When I got down into the water, this is mountain water. I'm 20 metres down inside the ground, and this water was absolutely freezing cold. So I'm in this water, freezing cold. I'd taken down another little bit of string which I'd tied to my waist, and this was to tie onto the jerry can handle. It was quite hard just to empty the water out of this jerry can. So I'm in the well, balanced in this rope. It's hurting underneath my armpits, and I'm trying to pour the water out of this jerry can. I finally get the water out. By this point my hands are freezing. I'm struggling to tie a knot, and I tie a knot onto the jerry can. It's kind of dangling behind me, and then I reach up and I hold onto the rope, and I look up, and up above me I can see this small circle of light, and there's a beautiful blue sky up above me, and the walls look dark, and I see these two heads looking down over me, and I shout up, okay, I'm ready, pull me up. And then I wait, and presumably they're running back, they're sort of 20 metres away from the well, and I wait, and I wait, and then I shout, pull! And I carry on waiting, and I carry on waiting, and absolutely nothing happens. And I think, what's going on? And then a moment later, I see one of my friends with his head looking down, and he just shouts down, we can't pull you up, it's impossible. And I realised that just my sheer weight and the friction of my weight on the rock at the top of the well, the wall of the well, they can't pull me up. I'm there, in the bottom of this well. This is deep end ministry. I've got my two friends at the top. I'm trusting my life into their hands, stupidly in a sense, but I'm there, depending on them. I'm down this well. I think, what am I going to do? I've got to climb up. So I reach one hand up the rope, and I start just trying to pull myself. I can't even pull myself out of the water. By this point, I'm down in the water, right up to my armpits. I can't pull myself up. I am so cold and weak from this water that there's absolutely no way on earth I could climb out of this well. It's too wide for me to bridge it in a kind of chimney climbing, rock climbing fashion to get out. The walls are smooth. I'm down this well. Thankfully, my friends realise there's a Land Rover there. So they shout down, we'll try the Land Rover. So there's a long delay while they take the rope over and tie it around the Land Rover. And then I hear the throaty noise of the diesel starting up. And in that split second, I have this panicky feeling. No, what if the rope snaps? What if the Land Rover can't pull me up? Which is a crazy idea. This is a 2.5 tonne vehicle. Obviously, it can pull my small weight out of the well. But in that moment, I don't know. And the Land Rover starts inching forwards, and I feel myself jerkily pulled up the well. I start walking up the well to try to stop myself being banged around, and I'm bracing myself, and it's a horrible, uncomfortable, painful haul up this well. And finally I get to the top, and my friend who's not driving is there pulling me out, and the relief, and then the exhilarant laughter when we realise how close we've come to disaster. It was a memorable moment. Let's just say that. Now, I've told this story many times over the years. For me, it's a great illustration of many things. It's a metaphor which could be used. You can think about it in terms of stepping out in faith. You can think of it in terms of trusting your lives into other people's hands. Or you can think of it as ending up in a hole of your own making and needing someone else to pull you out. Well, however you look at this story, for me it's a great example of being sometimes helpless. Friends holding you up, but even then they can't pull you out. They need something greater than themselves. It's an example of stepping out in faith. It is an example that sometimes God does ask us to do things. Sometimes we do things of our own initiative. Sometimes God asks us to do things where we're stepping out in faith, where we genuinely do not know as we step backwards into the void, will this rope hold me? Or when the moment comes to be pulled out, will this Land Rover hold my strength? Will the rope snap? We don't know until we've done it. Interestingly, sometimes God does take us way outside our comfort zone. When he does those things and he then proves himself to you and you realise the Land Rover is strong, the rope doesn't snap, you do end up with a story of faithfulness, with a story of strength and provision, which is a comfort for the future. Interestingly, right now in this season of confinement, I'm finding myself, and Miranda as well, we're finding ourselves in the uncomfortable place where actually we're on the end of the rope. We're outside the well, we're holding onto the rope, we're confined, we're not kind of on the front lines. And sometimes it's almost easier to be the person who's down the well, who's actively doing something. Right now, we're holding the end of the rope for other people. We're praying from home for other people. There's nothing actually else we can do. And almost it would be easier to be down the well. Sometimes it's hard to be holding the end of the rope. But it needs faithful people to hold the end of the rope. It needs faithful people at all stages of this process. So for me, this was one of those amazing moments of seeing God in a fresh way. And ultimately, God looks after us. So I hope we're not finding ourselves in holes of our own making. And if we do, may we find God in that place. And if God challenges us to step out in fresh ways during this season, may we as well find that he's dependable, that we have faithful friends who are holding the end of the rope for us.